The homeless man whispered hoarsely, "Don't move, just listen." Billionaire CEO Victoria Chen froze mid-step outside the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. She had just exited her sleek black Mercedes, her designer Versace gown shimmering under the relentless flash of camera bulbs. The corporate charity gala was in full swing inside, and photographers called her name from behind velvet ropes, their voices competing with the hum of the city. Her security detail flanked her on both sides, their eyes scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. Everything seemed perfectly orchestrated, exactly as it should be for a woman of her stature and wealth. Then she saw him. A ragged figure leaning against a graffiti-stained brick wall across the street caught her attention. At first glance, he looked like countless others the city had forgotten. Dirty layered clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, an unkempt graying beard covered most of his weathered face, and exhaustion seemed to weigh down his every movement. But it was the small girl clinging to his torn jacket that made Victoria's heart skip. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her wide eyes frightened as they darted between her father and the glittering spectacle across the street. Despite the man's obvious poverty and exhaustion, his eyes burned with desperate urgency, and something about his tone, rough yet clear, made Victoria pause. Something made her listen when every instinct told her to keep walking. Marcus's voice cut through the night air again, low but insistent. "Red dot. On your chest. Don't move." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She glanced down instinctively at her white evening gown, and her blood turned to ice. A tiny crimson point danced across the fabric of her bodice, right over her heart. The movement was small, precise, deliberate. Her mind raced back to the kidnapping prevention seminars her security team had forced her to attend, the warnings about laser sights and targeted attacks. This was real. A sniper. Somewhere in the darkness. Targeting her. Marcus slowly raised a dirty hand, pointing toward the rooftop of the building across the street. His movements were careful, measured, as though he knew any sudden gesture might trigger the shooter. "Saw the glint about 10 minutes ago," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Been watching you since your car pulled up. He's been tracking you, waiting for the right moment." Victoria's pulse hammered in her ears. Her security detail remained oblivious, their attention focused on the crowd and the photographers, not on the rooftops above. They were trained professionals, yet they had missed what this homeless man had seen. The little girl, Lily, whimpered softly and pressed closer to her father's leg. "Daddy, I'm scared," she whispered. Marcus pulled his daughter behind him with one protective arm while keeping his eyes locked on Victoria. "On 3, you drop," he said, his tone steady despite the fear Victoria could see flickering in his gaze. "I'll create a distraction. Your security will react. But you need to trust me right now." Victoria's mind raced through 1,000 calculations in the span of a heartbeat. Trust a homeless stranger or ignore the warning? Call out to her security and risk alerting the shooter? Every second of hesitation could be her last. But something in Marcus's eyes stopped her doubt cold. It wasn't just urgency she saw there. It was intelligence, certainty, and the unmistakable instinct of a father protecting his child. This man had nothing to gain and everything to lose, yet here he stood, risking exposure to save her life. She made her decision. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's jaw tightened with grim determination. 1, he counted. Victoria's knees bent slightly, her body coiling in preparation. 2. Her security team finally noticed her strange posture, hands moving toward their weapons in confusion. Before Marcus could say 3, he lunged forward with a speed that defied his worn-down appearance. His arms spread wide as he shouted, "Gun! Rooftop!" and grabbed Victoria's shoulders, pulling her down hard onto the pavement. The world exploded into chaos. The massive glass window of the hotel lobby behind them shattered with a deafening crash, shards raining down like deadly snow. The bullet had missed Victoria by inches, striking exactly where she had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. Screaming erupted from every direction. Guests scattered in panic, their elegant gowns and tuxedos forgotten as survival instinct took over. Victoria's security team drew their weapons with trained precision, shouting commands and forming a protective barrier. Marcus shielded both Victoria and Lily with his ragged body, covering them as completely as he could. Then came the second shot. The sharp crack echoed through the street, and Marcus grunted, his shoulder jerking violently. Blood bloomed through the fabric of his jacket, spreading dark and wet across the old material. He had been hit. The bullet meant for Victoria had found him instead. Lily screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, but Marcus held firm, refusing to move away from them even as pain lanced through his body. Victoria's head of security, a former military operative named Davies, barked orders into his radio while two other guards rushed toward the rooftop direction. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The city had erupted into controlled chaos, but Marcus remained still, his breathing ragged, his body a living shield between the two people he was protecting and whatever danger still lurked above. Police swarmed the scene within 3 minutes, their vehicles screeching to a halt with lights flashing red and blue across the facades of nearby buildings. Officers shouted instructions, cordoning off the area and evacuating bystanders. Marcus collapsed against the brick wall, his strength finally giving out. Lily clung to his good arm, her small face streaked with tears, her body shaking with sobs she tried desperately to contain. Victoria scrambled toward them on her hands and knees, her designer gown torn and stained with blood and street grime. None of that mattered now. "You're shot," she said urgently, her hands hovering over his wounded shoulder, unsure where to touch without causing more pain. "Someone get a medic." "No." Marcus shook his head weakly, his face pale beneath the dirt and beard. "No hospitals," he rasped, each word clearly costing him effort. "Can't afford it. They'll take Lily." His eyes, despite the pain clouding them, held a fierce desperation that Victoria recognized immediately. This was a man who had lost everything already and would not survive losing his daughter. "Please," he added, his voice breaking. "Don't let them take her from me." Victoria looked at him closely for the first time, really seeing him beyond the surface of poverty and homelessness. Beneath the weathered skin and exhaustion, she saw intelligence in the structure of his face, education in the way he formed his words despite the rough delivery. This man had been someone before the streets claimed him. Someone capable. Someone who deserved better than what life had given him. "You saved my life," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. "Both our lives." Paramedics arrived with their equipment, moving with practiced efficiency, but Marcus tried to pull away from their reaching hands. Lily clung tighter, terrified of being separated from her father. The child's small voice rose above the chaos. "Don't take my daddy. Please. He's all I have." Victoria made a decision in that moment that would change everything. She rose to her full height, her commanding presence reasserting itself despite her disheveled appearance. "He's coming with me," she announced to her head of security, her tone brooking no argument. "Private physician. My penthouse. Now." Davies hesitated only a moment before nodding. He had worked for Victoria Chin long enough to know when she had made up her mind. Within minutes, her security team had cleared a path through the crowd and moved Marcus and Lily into a secured vehicle, a black SUV with bulletproof windows and reinforced doors. Marcus was too weak to protest effectively. His vision swam as blood loss and shock began to take their toll. Lily clutched Victoria's hand with surprising strength for such a small child, her fingers cold and trembling. "Why?" Marcus whispered as they helped him into the vehicle, his eyes meeting Victoria's with genuine confusion. "You don't even know me." "I'm nobody." Victoria climbed in beside them, ignoring the protests of her publicist who was frantically trying to control the media disaster unfolding outside. She looked at this broken man who had risked everything for a stranger and felt something shift inside her chest, something she had not felt in years. Compassion. Real, unfiltered human compassion. "Because nobody deserves to die," she said quietly, her hand resting gently on Lily's small shoulder. "Not even billionaires." Marcus's lips curved into the faintest smile before his eyes closed and consciousness slipped away from him. The SUV pulled away from the chaos, speeding through the city streets toward Victoria's penthouse high-rise. The private elevator carried them directly to the top floor, where Victoria's personal physician was already waiting, summoned by a single phone call from Davies. Dr. Ellen Reeves was one of the best trauma surgeons in the city, and she took one look at Marcus's shoulder before getting to work. Victoria stood back, watching as they laid him on the leather sofa in her living room, Lily refusing to release her father's hand even as the doctor cut away his jacket to expose the wound. "The bullet grazed him," Dr. Reeves announced after a tense examination. "Didn't embed. He's lucky. Very lucky." She worked quickly, cleaning and suturing the wound with expert hands, while Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness. Lily sat on the floor beside the sofa, her small face pale and drawn, watching every movement the doctor made with terrified intensity. Victoria brought the child a bowl of warm soup from her kitchen, something her housekeeper had prepared earlier that evening. Lily looked up at her with those wide, frightened eyes and asked in a voice barely above a whisper, "Are you an angel? You're so pretty and shiny." The question cracked something open inside Victoria's carefully constructed walls. She knelt down beside the little girl and smoothed back her tangled hair. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm just someone who wants to help." But as she looked at Lily more closely, she noticed troubling signs. The child's skin had an unhealthy pallor, and there was a slight blue tinge to her lips that should not have been there. Her breathing seemed slightly labored, as though each breath required more effort than it should. Dr. Reeves noticed it too. After finishing with Marcus and ensuring he was stable and resting, she pulled Victoria aside into the hallway. "Miss Chin," she said quietly, her expression grave. "The child is showing signs of cardiac distress. Has she been seen by a doctor recently?" Victoria's heart sank. She looked back through the doorway at Lily, who had curled up on the floor beside her father, her small hand still clutching his. "I don't think so," Victoria answered. "They're homeless. I doubt they can afford medical care." Dr. Reeves nodded, her professional mask slipping to show genuine concern. "She needs to be examined properly. Soon. Those symptoms suggest a congenital heart condition. If left untreated, it could be fatal." Victoria returned to the living room and sat in the chair across from where Marcus slept. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, his face finally relaxed in unconscious peace. Lily had fallen asleep on the floor, exhausted from fear and stress. Victoria pulled a cashmere throw blanket over the little girl's small body and simply watched them both. This man who had nothing had given everything. He had seen danger that trained professionals missed. He had acted without hesitation. He had taken a bullet meant for her. And now she was learning that his daughter's life hung by a thread he could not afford to strengthen. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily on her shoulders. Davies entered the room quietly, his expression grim. "We caught the shooter," he said without preamble. "Rooftop of the building across the street, just like the homeless man said. Professional. High-powered rifle. He's in custody now, but he's talking. Says he was hired." Victoria's blood ran cold despite the warmth of her penthouse. "Hired by whom?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would not be simple. Davies's face grew even more serious. "Someone inside your company, Miss Chen. Someone close to you. He wouldn't give a name yet, but the detective said the money trail leads directly into your corporate structure. This wasn't random. This was planned by someone who knows your schedule, your security protocols, your routines." Victoria looked again at Marcus sleeping peacefully on her sofa, at Lily curled beneath the blanket on her floor. In the span of one evening, her entire world had tilted on its axis. Someone she trusted wanted her dead. A homeless man had saved her life. And now that man and his daughter had become the most important witnesses in an investigation that could destroy everything she had built. But more than that, they had become something else. Something she had not expected. They had become her responsibility. Her purpose. Perhaps even her redemption. She stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city below. Somewhere out there, someone was plotting her death. Someone she worked with. Someone she trusted. The betrayal burned, but it also ignited something fierce inside her. She had not built a billion-dollar empire by being weak or indecisive. "Davies," she said quietly, her voice carrying the steel that made her feared in boardrooms across the country. "I want you to find out who wanted me dead. Use every resource we have. Spare no expense. And get me everything on Marcus. Full background. Who he was. What happened to him. How he ended up on those streets. I need to know who just became the most important witness in my life." Davies nodded and pulled out his phone, already making calls as he left the room. Victoria remained at the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkness beyond the glass. Behind her, Marcus stirred slightly in his sleep, and Lily murmured something unintelligible. Victoria turned to look at them one more time before the night ended. Two souls who had every reason to ignore her, to let the universe take its course, to protect themselves first. Instead, they had risked everything. For her. A stranger. Someone who lived in a world so far removed from theirs that they might as well have existed on different planets. Yet here they were. In her home. Under her protection. And she would not fail them. Whatever it took. Whatever it cost. She owed them more than her life. She owed them a future. The city lights glittered below like a sea of stars, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to the dramas of individual lives. But up here, in this penthouse floating above it all, something had shifted. Something important. Something that felt like the beginning of a story that would change them all forever. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victoria's penthouse, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Marcus woke slowly, disoriented by the softness beneath him and the absence of concrete pressing against his bones. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that reminded him instantly of the previous night. He tried to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through the wounded area, and looked around with growing confusion. The room was enormous, decorated with the kind of understated luxury that only truly wealthy people could afford. Minimalist furniture, original artwork on the walls, a view of the city that stretched for miles in every direction. This was not a shelter. This was not a hospital. This was somewhere he absolutely did not belong. Lily slept beside him in the massive bed, her small body barely making a dent in the expensive linens. For the first time in months, she was not curled into a tight ball against the cold. Her face looked peaceful, younger somehow, the constant tension of street life temporarily erased by exhaustion and safety. Marcus's heart clenched at the sight of her. Everything he had endured, every humiliation and hardship, had been worth it to keep her with him. To keep her alive. Victoria sat in a chair near the window, watching them both with an expression Marcus could not quite read. She had changed from the blood-stained designer gown into elegant casual wear, tailored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than he used to make in a month. A coffee table between them held an elaborate breakfast spread, the kind of real food Marcus had not seen in years. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, bacon, juice in crystal glasses. The smell alone made his stomach clench with desperate hunger. "Where are we?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from sleep and lingering pain. Victoria set down the tablet she had been reading and met his eyes with surprising directness. "My penthouse," she answered simply. "You were shot saving me last night. It seemed like the least I could do was make sure you were properly cared for." Marcus's instant panic overrode everything else. "Lily," he said urgently, reaching for his daughter even though she slept peacefully beside him. "We can't stay here. We need to go. I appreciate what you did, but we can't accept charity. People like us, we don't belong in places like this." Victoria raised a calming hand, her expression gentle but firm. "Your daughter is safe, Marcus. I had my personal physician examine her last night after treating your shoulder." She paused, and something in that pause made Marcus's blood run cold. The way she hesitated, the careful choice of words, the compassion in her eyes. He knew what was coming before she said it. "Marcus, when was the last time Lily saw a cardiologist?" Victoria asked quietly. The question hit him like a physical blow. His face crumbled, months of denial and desperate hope collapsing under the weight of truth he had been avoiding. "I can't afford doctors," he whispered, shame and terror mixing in his voice. "I've been saving every penny I can, but it's never enough. Every time I get close, something happens. She gets sick, or it rains and our stuff gets ruined, or someone steals what little we have. I know something's wrong with her. I see it every day. But what can I do? I have nothing. I am nothing." Victoria leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "You're not nothing, Marcus. And your daughter has a congenital heart defect. It's serious, but it's treatable. With proper care and surgery, she can live a completely normal life." The words should have brought relief, but instead they brought Marcus to his knees emotionally. He buried his face in his hands as tears came, months and years of terror finally unleashed. "Her mother died of the same thing," he said through sobs that shook his entire body. "Hours after Lily was born. I watched her slip away and there was nothing I could do. The doctors tried, but it was too late. Too much damage. And now Lily has it too, and I can't save her either. I'm going to lose them both, and it's all my fault." The story poured out of him then, a confession he had never made to another living soul. He told Victoria everything. About his former life as an architect, a rising star at a prestigious firm with a beautiful wife and a future that seemed limitless. About Sarah's difficult pregnancy, the complications that developed in the third trimester, the emergency C-section that came too late to save her. About the massive hospital bills that insurance refused to cover, claiming pre-existing conditions and experimental treatments that were not approved. About the mounting debt that consumed everything, the depression that followed Sarah's death like a shadow he could not escape. He told her about losing his job when he could not function, when grief made it impossible to focus on designs and client meetings. About losing their apartment when he could not pay rent. About the threats from child services to take Lily away because he could not provide adequate care. About the impossible choice between surrendering his daughter to the foster system or keeping her with him on the streets. "I chose the streets," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't let them take her. She's all I have left of Sarah. She's all that matters. So we've been out there for almost 5 years now, and every day I watch her get a little weaker, a little more tired, and I know I'm failing her just like I failed her mother. But I don't know what else to do." Victoria listened to every word without interruption, and when Marcus finally fell silent, she pulled up files on her tablet with swift, practiced movements. "What's your full name?" she asked. "Marcus Thornton," he answered, confused by the question. Victoria typed rapidly, and within seconds she was showing him images he had not seen in years. His old portfolio. Award-winning architectural designs from his time at the firm. Buildings he had helped create, spaces that had been featured in magazines and won industry recognition. A photograph of him from 6 years ago, clean-shaven and confident, standing beside a scale model of a community center he had designed. "These are brilliant," Victoria said, genuine admiration in her voice. Marcus looked at the images and felt like he was seeing a stranger. "That person doesn't exist anymore," he said bitterly. "He died with Sarah. What you see now is just what's left." Victoria shook her head firmly. "He's sitting right in front of me. Wounded, exhausted, and scared, but still fighting for his daughter. Still seeing dangers that trained security professionals miss. Still risking his life for strangers. That takes more strength than designing buildings ever did." The conversation shifted then, and Victoria's expression grew serious, in a different way. "Marcus, I need to tell you about the man who tried to kill me last night. The shooter was captured. He's talking to the police now, and what he's saying is troubling." She explained that the assassin was a professional hired killer, paid a substantial sum to eliminate her. The money trail was still being traced, but initial investigations suggested it came from someone inside her company, someone with access to her schedule and security protocols. Someone close to her. Marcus sat up straighter despite the pain in his shoulder, his protective instincts overriding everything else. "You think it's someone in your company? Someone you trust?" Victoria nodded, her jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "I've spent the last 3 hours going through personnel files and financial records. The list of people with the access and motive to want me dead is shorter than you'd think, but it's not short enough. And whoever it is, they're not going to stop just because the first attempt failed." Marcus pieced it together quickly, his mind still sharp despite years of survival dulling other aspects of his life. "They'll come after you again. And now Lily and I are witnesses. We saw the laser sight. We can testify about the timing and the trajectory. We're liabilities to whoever hired that shooter." Victoria met his eyes with an intensity that reminded him she had not built a billion-dollar empire by being naive or weak. "Which is exactly why you're staying here, under my protection, until we figure out who's behind this. You saved my life, Marcus. I'm not going to let whoever wants me dead hurt you or your daughter because of it." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of the pride and independence that had kept him going through the worst years of his life. But he looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling with each breath, and he knew he could not afford pride anymore. Not when her life hung in the balance. While they talked, Victoria had her housekeeper bring fresh clothes for both Marcus and Lily, simple but well-made garments that actually fit. When Marcus emerged from the guest bathroom after showering for the first time in weeks, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. Clean, dressed in clothes without holes or stains, the wound on his shoulder professionally bandaged. He looked almost human again. Almost like the person he used to be. Lily woke up shortly after, confused and frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings until she saw her father. Victoria brought her warm oatmeal with fresh berries and honey, and the little girl ate with the desperate hunger of someone who never knew where the next meal was coming from. Later that morning, while Lily watched cartoons on a television bigger than any she had ever seen, Victoria asked Marcus to help her with something. She was organizing files related to the assassination attempt, trying to build a timeline of events and identify possible suspects. Marcus found himself drawn into the work, his analytical mind engaging with problems in a way it had not been allowed to in years. He noticed patterns in the data that Victoria's investigators had missed, connections between seemingly unrelated financial transactions. "You're wasted on the streets," Victoria said at one point, watching him work. "Your mind is still as sharp as it ever was." Marcus gave her a bitter smile. "Sharp mind doesn't matter much when you're trying to find a safe place to sleep or enough food to keep your daughter alive. Out there, intelligence is just another thing that makes you different." Another reason for people to look away. As they worked through the documents, something caught Victoria's attention. She was reviewing Marcus's personal belongings that had been collected from the shooting scene, items that police had logged as evidence and then released. Among the worn clothes and tattered blanket was a folder, plastic and cracked with age, that Marcus always kept with him. "What's this?" Victoria asked, pulling it out carefully. Marcus's expression shifted to something raw and painful. "Sarah's medical records. From when she was pregnant with Lily. From when she died. I keep them because they're all I have left of her besides our daughter. Proof that she existed. Proof that she mattered." Victoria opened the folder with reverence, understanding that she was holding something sacred. But as she read through the pages, her expression changed from respectful curiosity to shock and then to cold fury. The pharmaceutical company names jumped out at her immediately. The same companies that her firm had extensive business relationships with. The same companies that appeared again and again in her corporate partnership agreements. She read further, seeing unnecessary procedures, experimental drugs that had not been FDA approved, inflated costs that made no medical sense. There was a pattern here, a structure to the fraud that spoke of systematic corruption rather than isolated incidents. "Marcus," Victoria said carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she held the papers. "What hospital did Sarah die in?" He told her the name, and Victoria's heart sank. It was a subsidiary of a massive healthcare corporation, one of the largest in the country. And sitting on the board of that corporation, with significant financial investments in multiple related pharmaceutical companies, was Richard Sterling. Her chief operating officer. Her business partner of 10 years. The man she had trusted with half her company's operations. Victoria's mind raced through implications and connections at lightning speed. She pulled up corporate records on her tablet, cross-referencing dates and financial transactions. The pattern became clearer with each new piece of information. Sterling had invested heavily in pharmaceutical companies 5 years ago, right around the time Sarah died. Those investments had paid off spectacularly, funded in part by insurance fraud and unnecessary medical procedures pushed on vulnerable patients. Marcus's wife had been one of dozens, maybe hundreds of victims. The insurance denials that had bankrupted Marcus had been part of the scheme, ensuring that families could not afford to investigate or sue for malpractice. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Your wife might not have died from natural causes. She might have been killed for profit." The words hung in the air between them, too terrible to fully comprehend. Marcus stared at her, his face going pale beneath his newly clean skin. "What are you saying?" he whispered. Victoria showed him the documents, the financial trails, the connections between Sterling's investments and the hospital that had treated Sarah. She explained how the fraud worked, how pharmaceutical companies paid kickbacks to doctors for prescribing expensive experimental drugs, how hospitals inflated bills to maximize insurance payouts, how insurance companies then denied claims to force families into bankruptcy and silence. "Your family was destroyed by the same system," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "And the man orchestrating it, the man who profited from your wife's death and your suffering, is Richard Sterling. My CO. The same man who just tried to have me killed." Marcus's anguish transformed into something else then, something cold and focused and absolutely deadly. "You're telling me that this man, this monster, killed Sarah for money? That he's the reason Lily doesn't have a mother? That he's the reason we've been living on the streets for 5 years?" Victoria nodded, her own anger matching his. "And now he wants to kill me because I was starting to ask questions about some of the company's pharmaceutical partnerships. I was going to audit those relationships, clean house if I found anything improper. He couldn't let that happen because it would expose everything." Marcus stood up, pacing despite the pain in his shoulder. His daughter looked up from the television, sensing her father's distress, but he forced himself to smile at her reassuringly. When he turned back to Victoria, his voice was quiet but filled with iron determination. "Then we stop him. Together. We expose what he's done. We make sure he pays for every life he's destroyed." Victoria made phone calls to her most trusted advisors, people she knew had no connection to Sterling. She brought in private investigators, forensic accountants, lawyers who specialized in corporate fraud. Over the next several days, they built a case that was ironclad. Marcus's wife's medical records became the emotional center of a web of evidence that connected dozens of similar cases. Patients who had died unnecessarily. Families bankrupted by fraudulent medical bills. Insurance companies complicit in the scheme. And at the heart of it all, Richard Sterling, profiting from human suffering on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. During this time, Lily's condition became impossible to ignore. She had episodes where her lips turned blue and she struggled to breathe. Victoria immediately arranged for the best pediatric cardiologist in the country to examine her. The diagnosis confirmed what they feared. Lily had the same congenital heart defect that had killed her mother, and without immediate surgery, she would not survive much longer. The surgeon Victoria found was willing to operate, but the cost was staggering. Over $200,000 for the surgery alone, plus hospital stays and follow-up care. Marcus broke down completely when he heard the figure. "I can't," he sobbed, holding his daughter close. "I can't lose her too. She's all I have. She's everything. But I can't pay for this. I have nothing to give." Victoria knelt in front of him and took his hands in hers, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're not going to lose her, Marcus. I'm paying for the surgery. The best surgeon, the best hospital, whatever she needs. And before you argue, before you let pride get in the way, understand something. You saved my life. You risked everything for a stranger. Let me do the same for you." Marcus wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain his independence, to not become a charity case, to prove he could take care of his daughter himself. But when he looked at Lily, saw the trust in her eyes and the pallor of her skin, he knew he had no choice. "Why?" he asked Victoria, his voice breaking. "Why would you do this for us? We're nobody to you." Victoria's answer was immediate and honest. "Because you're the first person in years who saw me as a human being instead of a bank account or a business opportunity. Because 5 years ago, when your wife was dying in that hospital, I could have stopped this if I had been paying attention. I was too busy building my empire to notice the bodies underneath the foundation. Sterling was doing this under my nose, using my company's partnerships to facilitate his fraud, and I didn't see it. I can't change the past, but I can damn sure affect the future. Starting with saving your daughter's life." The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks out, giving Lily time to be stabilized and prepared. During those 2 weeks, Marcus and Victoria worked side by side, building the case against Sterling. Marcus's architectural training served him well as he created visual presentations of the evidence, flowcharts that connected deaths to profits in a way that was impossible to deny. His wife's case anchored everything, a human story that gave weight and meaning to the abstract numbers. Victoria arranged for an emergency board meeting, ostensibly to discuss company security in the wake of the assassination attempt. Sterling would be there, unsuspecting, and they would present the evidence of his crimes in front of the entire board. It was risky. If Sterling realized what was happening, he might run or destroy evidence or even try to harm them directly. But Victoria was done playing it safe. Justice required risks. The morning of the board meeting arrived, and it was also the day of Lily's surgery. Marcus was torn between two impossibilities, needing to be in both places at once. Victoria made the decision for him. "You go to your daughter," she said firmly. "She needs you more than I do. I can handle the board." Marcus resisted, feeling like he was abandoning her in the fight, but Lily's terrified face as they prepped her for surgery made the choice clear. He stayed. The hospital was the best pediatric cardiac facility money could buy, with equipment and specialists that represented the cutting edge of medical science. Lily looked so small on the gurney, hooked up to monitors and IVs, her eyes wide with fear she was trying desperately to be brave about. "Daddy," she whispered as they wheeled her toward the operating room. "Will I be normal after this? Will I be able to run and play like other kids?" Marcus's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same moment. He kissed her forehead, tears streaming down his face. "You've always been perfect, baby girl. Always. This is just going to make you stronger. You're going to do amazing things with your life, I promise." The surgical team took her away, and Marcus collapsed into a waiting room chair, unable to breathe properly. Hours stretched ahead of him like a vast desert of uncertainty. He prayed to Sarah's memory, begged her spirit to watch over their daughter, promised he would be a better father if Lily just survived this. Time lost all meaning in that waiting room. Other families came and went, their own dramas playing out, but Marcus remained frozen in his private hell of waiting and hoping and fearing. He checked his phone obsessively, seeing messages from Victoria updating him on the board meeting, but unable to focus enough to read them carefully. Nothing mattered except Lily. Nothing else existed except the hope that she would survive. Meanwhile, across the city in Victoria's corporate headquarters, another kind of surgery was taking place. The boardroom was filled with the company's directors, 12 men and women who represented billions in assets and influence. Richard Sterling sat in his usual place at Victoria's right hand, confident and relaxed, thinking this was just another meeting to address the minor inconvenience of a failed assassination attempt. Victoria began with routine business, allowing Sterling to settle into complacency. Then she shifted topics. "I want to discuss our pharmaceutical partnerships," she said calmly. "Specifically, some irregularities that have come to my attention regarding patient outcomes and billing practices at hospitals connected to our partner companies." Sterling's expression remained neutral, but Victoria saw the microscopic tension that entered his posture. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said smoothly. "Our pharmaceutical relationships are all above board and fully audited." Victoria smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "Are they? Because I have evidence that suggests otherwise. Evidence of systematic fraud, kickbacks, insurance manipulation, and patient deaths that were entirely preventable. Deaths that were profitable." She activated the large screen at the end of the boardroom, and Marcus's carefully constructed presentation began to play. Flowcharts showing money moving from pharmaceutical companies through shell corporations to Sterling's personal accounts. Medical records documenting unnecessary procedures. Insurance claim denials that followed suspicious patterns. And at the center of it all, photographs and stories of the victims. Dozens of faces. Dozens of families destroyed. And prominently featured Sarah Thornton, a young woman who died hours after giving birth, leaving behind a husband and daughter who would lose everything. The boardroom fell into stunned silence as the evidence unfolded. Sterling began to object, to claim this was fabricated or taken out of context, but Victoria cut him off. "These are authenticated documents, Richard. We have the originals. We have testimony from whistleblowers at 3 different hospitals. We have forensic accounting that traces every dollar. And we have the medical files of Marcus Thornton's wife, whose death you profited from directly." Sterling's mask finally cracked. "You'll trust the word of a homeless man over me?" he sneered. "I've been with this company for 10 years. I've helped build this empire. And you're going to believe some vagrant who probably doesn't even understand what he's looking at." Victoria's voice was ice. "That vagrant saved my life. And his wife's medical records are just the beginning. We have 47 other similar cases, all connected to your investments, all resulting in unnecessary deaths and bankrupted families." The board erupted into chaos, directors demanding explanations, legal counsel being summoned, security being called. Sterling tried to leave, but Victoria had anticipated that. The doors opened to reveal police detectives with an arrest warrant. "Richard Sterling," the lead detective said formally. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and multiple counts of criminally negligent homicide." As Sterling was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and threatening lawsuits, Victoria felt no triumph. Only exhaustion and the weight of knowing that justice, while necessary, could not undo the harm that had been done. She checked her phone and saw a message from Marcus, sent 20 minutes earlier. Just 3 words, but they were the most important 3 words in the world. Surgery was successful. Victoria left the boardroom immediately, ignoring the questions being shouted at her by board members and lawyers. She drove herself to the hospital, breaking every speed limit, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She found Marcus in the recovery room, sitting beside Lily's bed, holding his daughter's small hand while she slept off the anesthesia. His face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. Actually smiling, something Victoria had never seen him do. "She's going to live," he whispered when Victoria entered. "The surgeon said the repair was perfect. Her heart is going to be strong. She's going to be okay." Victoria sat down on the other side of the bed, and for a long moment, the 3 of them simply existed in that space. A homeless single father, a billionaire CEO, and a little girl who had been given back her future. "Sterling's been arrested," Victoria said quietly. "The board is calling for a full investigation. His assets are being frozen. Everyone he hurt is going to have a chance at restitution." Marcus looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that went beyond gratitude. It was recognition. Understanding. A connection that had been forged through shared trauma and shared purpose. "Thank you," he said. "For everything. For believing me. For saving my daughter. For giving us a chance." Victoria shook her head. "You saved me first, Marcus. In more ways than you know." Over the following days, as Lily recovered and grew stronger with each passing hour, the full scope of Sterling's crimes became public. The media seized on the story with voracious appetite. A billionaire CEO targeted for assassination because she was about to expose massive pharmaceutical fraud. A homeless man who saved her life and helped bring down a criminal empire. A little girl given a second chance through the generosity of the woman her father rescued. During Sterling's fraud investigation, Victoria's legal team uncovered another layer to his crimes. Sterling had been systematically acquiring property through fraudulent foreclosures, targeting families in medical bankruptcy, and forcing them to sell valuable land for pennies on the dollar. One of those properties had belonged to Marcus's family, seized during the chaos after Sarah's death when Marcus was drowning in medical debt and grief. The land had been sold to a development company that was secretly owned by Sterling, who then flipped it to Victoria's company for a massive profit. The property was now worth over $3 million, developed into a luxury apartment complex that generated substantial ongoing revenue. Victoria's horror at discovering her company had profited from Marcus's pain was absolute. She committed immediately to full restitution plus damages for the suffering Sterling's fraud had caused. Marcus would receive not just the current value of the property, but also a percentage of the profits it had generated over the past 5 years. When the lawyers explained the settlement to Marcus, he sat in stunned silence. $3.2 million. An amount of money that would have been incomprehensible to him just weeks ago. Money that represented not just financial security but vindication, acknowledgement that what had been done to him and Sarah was wrong and worthy of compensation. "You don't have to do this," he said to Victoria, though his voice lacked conviction. Victoria met his eyes steadily. "Yes, I do. It's called justice. My company benefited from your suffering, even if I didn't know it at the time. That debt has to be paid." Marcus accepted, and with that acceptance came the first real planning for a future he had not dared to imagine. He established a foundation in Sarah's memory called Lily's Light, dedicated to helping homeless families dealing with medical crises. He partnered with shelters and hospitals to ensure that no parent would face the impossible choice between keeping their child and getting them proper medical care. Victoria became a co-founder of the foundation, contributing not just money but time and genuine passion. Working side by side with Marcus on the foundation revealed aspects of both of them that had been hidden or suppressed. Marcus's architectural brilliance, dormant for years, resurged as he began designing affordable housing projects specifically for families transitioning out of homelessness. Victoria discovered a capacity for hands-on compassion that her business empire had never required. They spent long hours together, planning and building, and slowly, inevitably, feelings began to grow that went beyond gratitude or shared purpose. One evening, working late in Victoria's home office with blueprints spread across every surface and Lily asleep in the guest room, Marcus looked up from his designs and found Victoria watching him. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. Victoria smiled, a real smile that transformed her usually serious face. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in 6 weeks. How different everything is." Marcus set down his pencil. "I was sleeping on concrete 6 weeks ago. Lily was dying. I thought I had nothing left to lose and nothing left to hope for. Now I'm sitting in a penthouse designing buildings again. My daughter is healthy, and I'm part of something that might actually help people. It doesn't feel real sometimes." Victoria stood and walked around the desk, stopping close enough that Marcus could smell her perfume. "It's real," she said softly. "All of it. Including this." She took his hand, and the touch sent electricity through both of them. Marcus stood as well, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear or stress. "Victoria, I don't fit in your world. I'm still that homeless man underneath these nice clothes. I still have nightmares about the streets. I still panic when Lily coughs or looks tired. I'm broken in ways I don't think I'll ever fully heal from." Victoria reached up and touched his face gently. "And I'm a woman who built an empire while people suffered in my name. Who was so focused on profits that I missed a monster operating inside my own company. Who measures worth in dollars instead of humanity. We're both broken, Marcus. Maybe that's exactly why this works. He kissed her then, tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances and impossible hope, of two people who had every reason to remain alone, finding connection in the least likely of circumstances. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Marcus laughed shakily. "My daughter is going to have so many questions," he said. As if summoned by her name, Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked at her father and Victoria standing close together, holding hands, and a huge grin spread across her face. "I knew it," she announced triumphantly. "I told Daddy you were like a princess. Princesses always fall in love with the heroes who save them." Victoria laughed and knelt down to Lily's level. "Well, in this case, the hero saved the princess. Your daddy is the bravest person I know." Lily hugged them both, her small arms barely able to reach around them. "Does this mean we get to stay here forever? And you'll be my new mommy?" The question hung in the air, too big and too important to answer lightly. Marcus and Victoria looked at each other over Lily's head, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement that yes, this was happening. Yes, they were becoming something. Yes, forever was a possibility worth considering. "How about we take it one day at a time?" Victoria suggested gently. "But yes, sweetheart. You can stay here as long as you want. This is your home now too." 6 months passed in a blur of activity and transformation. Sterling's trial concluded with guilty verdicts on all counts, resulting in a 25-year prison sentence. The pharmaceutical fraud investigation expanded to include dozens of other executives and resulted in sweeping reforms of medical billing practices and insurance oversight. Lily recovered fully from her surgery, her energy and color returning until she was indistinguishable from any other healthy 7-year-old. She started school for the first time in her life, making friends and discovering talents that had been suppressed by years of survival. Marcus returned fully to architecture, but with a focus that was entirely different from his earlier career. He designed affordable housing that was actually beautiful, spaces that gave dignity to people who had been told they deserved nothing. His first major project was a transitional housing complex for homeless families, featuring on-site medical care, childcare, job training, and community spaces that fostered connection rather than isolation. Victoria restructured her company from the ground up, implementing ethical oversight and transparency measures that became an industry model. She used her platform to advocate for healthcare reform and corporate accountability, becoming an unexpected voice for social justice in business circles that had previously cared only about profit margins. The foundation grew beyond anything either of them had initially imagined, helping hundreds of families escape the cycle of homelessness and medical bankruptcy. Every family they helped was a small redemption, a way of honoring Sarah's memory and acknowledging the suffering that had brought Marcus and Victoria together. Through it all, their relationship deepened from attraction to genuine partnership to love that felt both inevitable and miraculous. They worked side by side daily, challenged each other, supported each other, and discovered that brokenness shared could become strength multiplied. On a cool evening in early autumn, exactly 6 months after the night Marcus had whispered "Don't move" and changed both their lives forever, Victoria organized a press conference to announce the foundation's expansion and the completion of Marcus's first housing project. The event was held at the site of the new building, a beautiful structure that managed to be both practical and inspiring. Media from across the country attended, cameras rolling as Victoria and Marcus stood together at a podium festooned with microphones. Lily stood between them, healthy and radiant in a new dress, her hand clutching her father's. Victoria spoke first, outlining the foundation's accomplishments and future goals, but when she introduced Marcus, she did something unexpected. She took his hand publicly, in front of all those cameras and reporters, and held it while he spoke. The gesture was small but profound, a billionaire CEO openly claiming connection with a man who had been homeless just months before, defying every social convention about appropriate relationships and class boundaries. Marcus's speech was brief but powerful. He talked about his journey from desperation to hope, about the people who remained invisible on the streets, about the systemic failures that created homelessness and medical bankruptcy, about the possibility of redemption and second chances. 6 months ago, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it, I was nobody. Society looked through me like I was glass. I had accepted that my daughter and I would probably die on those streets, forgotten and unmourned. Then Victoria Chin gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Not just money or opportunity, though those things matter. She gave me back my humanity, my dignity, my right to be seen as a person rather than a problem. And in return, I'd like to think I gave her something too. A reminder that worth isn't measured in dollars. That heroism doesn't require wealth or status. That the most important things we can do for each other are often the simplest. See each other. Help each other. Care about each other's pain as if it were our own. The crowd responded with thunderous applause, and several reporters wiped tears from their eyes. During the question and answer session that followed, one journalist asked the question everyone wanted to know. Ms. Chin, there have been rumors about your relationship with Mr. Thornton. Can you comment on the nature of your connection? Victoria smiled and looked at Marcus, who nodded permission. Marcus saved my life, she said clearly. But more than that, he taught me what truly matters. We've become partners in this work, and yes, we've also become partners in life. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of it. More applause, this time mixed with excited chatter. The story of the billionaire and the homeless man who fell in love was exactly the kind of narrative the media loved, but for Marcus and Victoria, it was simply truth. After the formal event ended and the crowds dispersed, the three of them stood together looking up at the building Marcus had designed. The last light of sunset painted the facade in shades of gold and rose, making the ordinary materials look almost magical. It's beautiful, Victoria said softly. Marcus put his arm around her, pulling her close. It's just a building. Bricks and mortar. What makes it matter is what it represents. Second chances. Fresh starts. Hope. Lily tugged at both their hands, her voice cutting through the moment with childlike directness. Are you going to get married? Because all my friends at school say when grown-ups love each other, they get married. Marcus and Victoria looked at each other, and something passed between them that needed no words. They had been moving toward this moment since that first night, since the whispered warning and the bullet and the choice to trust a stranger. Every day since had been a step on this path. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Victoria's breath caught. He knelt on the pavement in front of the building he had created, in front of the daughter he had fought so hard to keep, and opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. Victoria Chin, he said, his voice thick with emotion. 6 months ago you saw me when I was invisible. You gave me back everything I thought I'd lost. You saved my daughter's life. You helped me find justice for my wife. You made me believe in futures again. Will you marry me? Will you be part of our family officially? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you've given us? Victoria was crying openly now, nodding before she could even speak. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, absolutely yes. On one condition. Marcus looked up at her surprised. What condition? Victoria smiled through her tears. That you stop thinking you need to be worthy of anything. You already are. You always were. The world just failed to see it. But I see you, Marcus Thornton. I see you completely. And I love everything I see. He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed while Lily jumped up and down between them, shrieking with joy. Cameras from the lingering media captured the moment, and the image would appear on front pages and websites around the world the next day. The billionaire and the homeless man. The CEO and the single dad. Two broken people who had found wholeness in each other, who had transformed tragedy into purpose, who had proven that love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to try. As darkness fell and the city lights began to glow around them, the three of them stood together looking at what they had built, both literally and metaphorically. A family forged from impossible circumstances. A foundation that would help thousands. A love story that defied every expectation. Marcus thought about the night 6 months ago when he had seen that red laser dot and made the split-second decision to act. He thought about Sarah and wondered if somehow she had guided him to that street corner at that exact moment, if her love had reached across death to save their daughter by putting him in position to save Victoria. He would never know for certain, but he chose to believe it. Chose to believe that love was stronger than death, that redemption was always possible, that second chances were real. Lily looked up at her father and her soon-to-be stepmother and asked with the directness only children possess, "Are we going to live happily ever after now? Like in the stories?" Victoria knelt down and hugged the little girl close. "We're going to try, sweetheart. We're going to try our very best." And that, Marcus thought as he wrapped his arms around both of them, was all anyone could really promise. Not perfection. Not an absence of struggle or pain. But the commitment to try. To keep choosing each other. to keep building something good from the broken pieces of what came before. The city stretched out around them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of stories playing out in joy and sorrow and everything between. Somewhere out there, other Marcus Thorntons were sleeping on concrete, other Lilies were going without medical care, other systems were failing the people they should protect. The work would never be finished. The fight would never be fully won. But tonight, in this moment, 3 people who had been shattered had become whole. And that was enough. That was everything. That was hope.